We have some procedural stuff. We're going to start the meeting in a minute. It's a formal hearing tonight, so we have a couple of formal processes we're going to be doing this evening. So you can see a sign language to my right. That'll be. We also have a Spanish interpreter and a Korean interpreter. Maybe they can come up and maybe say a word or two.
Sí, buenas noches para el público presente. Las personas que tengan que oír la presentación en español se pueden dirigir a la parte de atrás donde les entregamos receptores. Muchas gracias.
예, 한국 통역이 필요하시면 저 뒤에 와서 요청하시면은 그 통역 기기를 들을 수 있으니까 뒤에 오셔서 들으시면 됩니다. 감사합니다.
All right, I'm your MC for tonight if you haven't figured it out. Okay, I'm Dennis Ronick from the Bureau of Flood Resilience. But before we start the evening, I'd like to introduce our host, Mayor Vaccaro.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Dennis. This project we've been doing, they've been working on for the last couple of years. Just want to recognize some of the people. I'm going to mention them by their first name because I've been around with them for such a long period of time. We're like friends. From the DEP personnel, Dennis, Linda, Kim, Bob, and Alexis. And from AECOM, Chris, Lulu, Brian, and Jen. I want to thank them for all their work that they've been doing over the last couple of years. Also, Mayor Gary Brugger from South Hackensack and Mayor Ragusio from Little Ferry. I want to thank them for the work that they put in and being a part of what the Executive Steering Committee is. Part of tonight's event is something that needs to be done as a mandate, as part of what we're doing here. So you'll see the presentation tonight on the environmental impact and how it's going to affect all three of the projects. So again, I just want to welcome everybody here to Moonachie, and I'll turn it back over to Dennis.
It's like the Oscars. I have a new outfit on now. So. All right. We also have another special guest. Carlito Almeida is here on behalf of the Office of Congressman Bill Pascrell, Jr.
Good evening. Just like to read a short statement from Congressman Bill Pascrell. The devastating impacts of Superstorm Sandy are still being felt in homes, businesses, and communities across our state. I remain worried about the potential damage if another storm were to hit our shores. That is why I was proud to fight with my colleagues in the New Jersey delegation for every recovery dollar we received. The Rebuild by Design competition and project before us today was created because of the Sandy supplemental funding law we passed. I am pleased to learn we are making progress in using these funds to protect the Meadowlands to reduce flood risk. I encourage my constituents and all stakeholders to review the preferred alternative being presented this evening so they can communicate their priorities to protect the Meadowlands and our communities. Thank you. Dennis.
I want to thank you very, very much, and thank you, Mayor Vaccaro, for hosting us tonight. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Does everybody have this? Did everybody pick this up on the way in? It's like a little trifold. This is our roadmap for tonight. We're going to be using it throughout the evening, or some of the things we mention, maybe an idea, or we talk about an alternative. Use it as a resource throughout the evening. I want to thank everyone for taking time to participate, and as we move our Meadowlands Flood Resiliency Project forward. I see a lot of familiar faces here. This is a public hearing, and this hearing may feel more formal than some of our earlier workshops and public meetings. You will notice a stenographer off to my left who will be dutifully recording every word, so we have a transcript of tonight's proceedings. The hearing is also being videotaped tonight as well. We will post a copy of the PowerPoint presentation tomorrow on our website. In your pamphlet, the website address is on there if you don't have it already. And we'll be posting the video of tonight's presentation when it becomes available in the coming weeks. Following the presentation, we'll open up the microphone for the public comment portion of the hearing. Anyone wishing to make a comment will have an opportunity to speak. We'll have a slide about that later in the evening. I'm not going to go into it right now. And we're going to begin with a presentation by AECOM giving a high-level overview of the draft environmental impact statement. That's why we're here tonight. It's a large document, so the 45-minute presentation cannot cover the entire document, but some of the slides will direct you to chapters where you can find more information. Public participation is an integral part of the National Environmental Policy Act's procedural requirements. Sometimes you may hear members at the podium talk about NEPA. That's what it means, National Environmental Policy Act. As some of you may know, public input has played a critical role in shaping the direction of this project. From the purpose and need we did together, to the recommendation of a preferred alternative in January, your input has been considered at every step and will continue to be an integral part of the design phase as we move forward. This hearing does not mark the end of the opportunity to comment on the DEIS. You will have until July 15th, 2018 to submit comments through email, through the mail. Tonight you can do it by microphone, or you can drop a card in the box that's by our transcription. Keep in mind that the project is over 5,000 acres. Across such a large project area, we took a holistic approach to evaluating flood and flood risk. Rather than town by town, we looked at the project area as an interconnected watershed. Our strategy is to unplug the major drainage choke points at East Riser Ditch and LOSEN SLOTE. It made sense to start with downstream in the watershed to create additional capacity and see the benefits accrue into the upstream communities. And I like Mayor Vaccaro, I want to thank the Executive Steering Committee, the Community Advisory Group, and the mayors of Moonachie, South Hackensack, Little Ferry, Carlstadt, and Teterboro. You've been instrumental in moving this project forward. And I want to recognize some people who are here tonight. Well, I recognize them all already. But I'd also like to thank Dr. Pons for allowing us to use this school tonight. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Banowski from AECOM to begin our presentation. Thank you so much.
Dennis, you forgot your roadmap.
I did, I found my roadmap.
I don't want you to get lost. So good evening. We're happy to be here tonight to walk you through the draft EIS. Here's an agenda. We're going to kind of go through the NEPA overview and the timeline. We're going to look at the purpose and need of the project. We're going to take a look at some of the summary of the build alternatives and a summary of the flood reduction. We'll show some of the benefits from the project. And then Brian's going to take us through a summary of the EIS itself. And then like Dennis said, you'll have an opportunity for public comment. So what is NEPA? It's the National Environmental Policy Act. It applies to all projects with federal funding, and this project is one of those projects. It ensures that the federal government considers environmental effects prior to the implementation of a project. And it requires an EIS, like we're going to be talking about tonight. So the draft EIS goes through the purpose and need, has a description of the proposed actions and alternatives, talks about the coordination efforts and the existing conditions of the affected environment. It also talks about the consequences of the alternatives. This is a timeline of the NEPA process. You can see from the black arrow, that's where we are today. We were here almost 2 years ago, July 6, 2016, where we did the public scoping meeting right in this room. Some of you were here. So after the public hearing tonight, you'll be able to provide your comments. There's a 45-day public comment period, which we're in the middle of right now. Once we get the public comments, we'll address them in the final EIS, and we go through ultimately to a record of decision, which allows us to move forward with design. So throughout the process, and again, a lot of you have been involved in this, there's a pretty robust public engagement course that we've taken. One is the Executive Steering Committee, which the mayors of the 5 towns are involved with, as well as some of the major stakeholders, including NJDEP, Sports and Exposition Authority, and Bergen County. There's a Citizens Advisor Group, a CAG group, that was meeting monthly to take us through, where we walk them through the design process and the feasibility process and what we were looking at for these alternatives. And then there's the federal outreach, which is part of this hearing tonight. So again, Dennis said there's a way to provide public comment. Tonight you can step up to the microphone, you can provide an oral comment. You can provide written comments on the cards you have in front of you. You can also email your comments to DEP at the email address above, or you can mail your comments to Dennis in the back. The comment submission deadline is July 15th, so it's coming close. So let's start with the purpose and need. So the purpose may seem obvious, but it's to reduce flood risk and increase resiliency within the 5 town areas, and reduce the impacts to critical infrastructure due to flooding. The need, I think you guys are probably all aware of the need. You have a low-lying area that's impacted by storm surge and rainfall, fluvial flooding. But we want to promote community resilience, reduce flood insurance claims, enhance water quality, and protect the public health and property. So our project goals were to provide the best possible project that provides flood reduction and, as one of the requirements of the grant, co-benefits for the community, as well as storm protection and potentially quicker recovery times post a storm event. There are some constraints, though, with the funding. One of the constraints is it has to be an independent utility. And what's that mean? That means that the project can't rely on additional funding or an additional project to allow it to function as designed. It needs to be built with the available funds. That's all the money there is for the project. And it needs to be fully functional by September 2022. And because this is a federally funded project, it needs to have a positive benefit cost ratio. And what that means is that for every dollar we put in, we need to get more than $1 back in potential benefits. And we need to minimize any adverse effects on the environment, and that's a lot about what we'll talk about tonight. So these are the 3 alternatives that we put forward. Alternative 1 is a structural flood reduction, basically protecting against a storm surge. Alternative 2 is what we're calling a stormwater drainage improvements that addresses the rainfall flooding. And alternative 3, which ended up being the preferred alternative, is a combination of the two. So it protects against a storm surge as well as the rainfall flooding. So I'm going to bring up Lula Luquitis, who's one of our lead designers, and she's going to walk us through the different alternatives.
Good evening, everyone. So as Chris mentioned, I'm going to quickly take us through a brief synopsis of all of the features under each alternative, starting with alternative 1. So alternative 1 is the structural flood reduction plan. And just a reminder, this is a plan that basically looks at providing protection for coastal storm surge in the community. And the image that you're seeing up on the screen is the final concept that was produced for the Alternative 1 storm surge plan. And basically the concept ended up consisting of a line of protection that would provide protection to approximately a 50-year storm today. And that level of protection would sit at a 7-foot elevation, which is basically a 7-foot datum for the NAV 88. And the team really looked at multiple strategies, and we've presented this in the past, these ideas of incorporating potential public realm benefits, looking at cost-effective solutions, and then ultimately putting forth a design proposal for a new surge barrier at Berries Creek. So I'm going to walk through each of those elements in a little bit more detail. So under Alternative 1, under this plan, we are looking at approximately 19,700 linear feet of flood walls, approximately 900 linear feet of levees and berms, and then incorporated into the line of protection a series of gates. So one tide gate, and a tide gate ultimately helps control water during tidal fluctuation, and then closure gates. And closure gates are really necessary to maintain access. So they're used specifically for roads when there's road access or boat access needed. As I mentioned, under Alternative 1, we'd also be constructing a surge barrier at Berries Creek. And as part of the surge barrier construction would be a new pump station. So a 1,000 cubic feet per second pump station, and then a gate system. So 2 gates, an east and a west gate, that would total 118 feet. And ultimately, the construction of this surge barrier would help protect Berries Creek from flooding during a large storm event. As Chris mentioned, we also looked at creative ways to fold in this idea of co-benefits into the project. So with alternative one, we found 4 potential opportunities to incorporate new public open space and work with engineers to ensure that it was part of the design, but provided places for new community access to the Hackensack River, recreation potential, and also habitat enhancement. So this graphic that you're seeing here was an example of an idea that we had called cantilever walkway, and ultimately it raised the flood elevation to that 7 foot and was also created a walkway. So that was a brief synopsis of alternative one, and now we're going to move into alternative two, which is the stormwater drainage improvement concept. And under this concept, we were looking at strategies to help with more of the frequent flooding that the community faces. So under this alternative, we were looking at ways to provide new and improved gray infrastructure, and then also a green infrastructure network, which was a combination of thinking about how the green infrastructure and parks and open spaces could complement the stormwater design. Under alternative two, we would look at creating 3 new pump stations, 2 pump stations at LOSEN SLOTE that would include connection by force main. And basically a force main is a pressurized pipe which helps move water from one location to another location. And under this scenario, we'd be looking at moving water from the upper reaches of LOSEN SLOTE to discharge in the lower reaches. And then also a new pump station at the East Riser Ditch, and this would be connected to the channel improvements. So speaking of channel improvements, we've talked about these in the past. Under the alternative two concept, we would be looking at channel dredging and improvements basically from Berries Creek up to Moonachie Avenue. Also included in the improvements would be replacement of culverts and the railroad bridge. And then in addition, we would look at restabilizing the channel edge with native vegetation. And ultimately, all of these improvements would help increase conveyance capacity and also provide new opportunity for habitat. Alternative two also looked at providing new park systems in the community. We were looking at 5 parks total, 3 waterfront parks and 2 interior parks, totaling approximately 20 acres. And then also improvements to 5 existing open space and public facilities within the community. And this is an example of the improvements that could happen potentially at Caesar Place Park. And it's a combination of wetland creation and green infrastructure, which would help slow the flow of water. Would also provide water quality benefits. And then an additional opportunity to provide some sort of recreation and education. As I mentioned with green infrastructure, not only are we looking to implement green infrastructure in the parks and open spaces, but also along roadways in the communities. And so some of the systems and strategies that we're looking at are bioswales, rain gardens, and storage trenches. And basically these elements will be designed to filter 1.2 inches of water in a 2-hour event. And then the systems are also designed to tie back into the stormwater system in the event that the capacity kind of reaches its full capacity, infiltration reaches its full capacity. And then a quick recap of alternative 3, which is the hybrid concept. So alternative 3 has been identified as the preferred alternative, the hybrid concept. And the reason why it's been identified as the preferred alternative is because it's the only alternative that meets both of the challenges that the community faces. So challenges of coastal storm surge flooding, but also interior stormwater drainage issues. And because we've been up against so many constraints with this project, with timeline, funding, and budget, we have broken the hybrid design down into 2 different plans, the build plan and the future plan. So the build plan ultimately represents a feasible plan that can be constructed within the timeline, within the permitting constraints by 2022. And it's quite similar to what was just presented for alternative 2. It would be an inland flood reduction strategy, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. While the future plan would have additional elements from alternative 2, and then would also include the full complement of Alternative 1, which would be the full coastal storm surge plan. And the idea is that these elements would build off of the build plan and could be implemented over time in the community when future funding becomes available. So just a quick recap on the build plan. As you can see from this image, it's quite similar to that of Alternative 2. It's a stormwater drainage project that still looks at improvements and new gray infrastructure and green infrastructure for the community. And we'll talk about the distinctions. So under Alternative 3 build plan, we'd be constructing 2 pump stations. So basically all of the improvements to East Riser Channel, the pump station, and the channel improvements remain the same as I've already discussed under Alternative 2. And then with LOSEN SLOTE, we would be constructing 1 pump station and 1 set of force main and improvements. So again, channel improvements remain the same for the build plan as Alternative 2. As far as the open space features go, for the build plan, we'd be looking at constructing 3 new parks and open spaces, 1 waterfront park and 2 interior parks, which is approximately 7.6 acres. Still considering the improvements to 5 existing open space, improved open spaces and public amenities with the same type of benefits for recreation and habitat as I discussed in Alt 2. Again, for the build plan, the green infrastructure systems, 41, which is the same as Alt 2, would remain the same. And then we're just going to quickly touch on the elements that could be incorporated in the future by others when additional funding becomes available. And the idea is that you can build off of the build plan. And so this graphic represents elements from Alternative 2, so stormwater drainage elements that could potentially be incorporated later. So you'll see that number 2 represents the 2nd pump station in the LOSEN SLOTE drainage area. And then 1 is showing a potential idea to continue the drainage improvements up the East Riser Channel to the upper reaches, so including the dredging, increasing conveyance capacity, providing habitat improvements, and then also a new pump station. And then looking at the potential to add in Alternative 1, which would be the storm surge concept in a later date. So that concludes the recap of the 3 alternatives. And if you would like more information, more detailed information, all the sections have been listed at the bottom of the slides, so just refer to the draft DEIS. And then I'll invite Chris back up to talk a little bit about flood reduction.
So we'll talk a little bit about what the benefits are for each of the individual alternatives. And what you see up here is the no action alternative. And if I can get the pointer to work. So the purple dashed line represents the project boundary. To the left is existing conditions. The center graphic is a 2075 horizon using the NOAA intermediate low 1.2 feet of sea level rise over that period. And then the one to the right is the 2075 horizon with the NOAA intermediate high, which is 2.4 feet of sea level rise. So this is a normal tide condition, existing conditions to the left showing you how the inundation in light blue. As you work across the 2075 time horizon, you see the increase in flooding under a normal tidal condition. This is under Alternative 1. So the darker blue area shows the areas of benefit. These are areas that were flooded under the normal tide condition with under the no action alternative that are no longer flooded or would no longer be flooded under the Alternative 1 scenario. So you can see the area of benefit increases as sea level rises. So for Alternative 2, which is the fluvial or stormwater component of it, this is the East Riser Ditch SUB-WATERSHED. To the image to the left is the 2-year storm in 2023, which is when the project could be completed, and the 100-year storm in 2023 to the right. And again, no action alternative. So what you see here is a comparison of the flooding under Alternative 2 implementation. So again, the left is the 2-year storm in 2023. The right is the 100-year storm. The areas of orange are where you're seeing benefit from the implementation of alternative 2 in this drainage area. Similar graphic for LOSEN SLOTE. Again, the 2-year to the left and the 100-year storm to the right under the no action existing conditions. And then again, the orange, where we're seeing a benefit from the project implementation for alternative 2. And for the hybrid, same graphic, the no action alternative for flooding in East Riser to the 2-year storm. This is the same as alternative 2. And then the benefit. And this is saying the same as alternative 2 because it's the same interventions that are occurring in the hybrid in East Riser that are occurring in alternative 2. And then in the LOSEN SLOPE SUB-WATERSHED, again, the 2-year storm and the 100-year storm in 2023. And then the benefit. This is slightly reduced benefit because if you remember, Lulu talked about only one pump station being included in the build plan, so it's a little different than alternative 2. So that sums up the benefits and the summary of the alternatives. And now I'm going to bring up Mr. Boos, who is going to talk about the environmental impact analysis.
How is everyone? Good. Are you overwhelmed by all the information already? Yes. Okay. So I'm here to even overwhelm you more. As you can see by what Chris and Lulu presented, it's amazing what was accomplished with a lot of your help in the room here tonight, in the form of the ESC, in the form of the CAG. It took 2 years to get us from the time we were here, July 6, 2016, to today, from initial scoping to that document sitting on the table. So how many of you have read the draft EIS? Excellent. How many of you are telling the truth? Okay, most of you. Very good. It's been a process. I've been doing this 30 years, and I have to say this is the most challenging project that I've had the privilege of working on, simply because we're trying to adapt a project to come up with a comprehensive solution in a short period of time for a limited amount of money with a lot of different variables going on simultaneously. So, what did the EIS look at? And I apologize if I overwhelm you. I'm going to try to go through this at as high a level as possible, but meaningful. The EIS had to take that purpose and need that Chris discussed, those action alternatives that Lulu discussed, and overlay them in time and space on a 5,500 acre project area that many of you call home. So over the last 2 years, about 100 subject matter experts within our team became very familiar with the place you know and love. We have had a lot of analysts working on this. We were doing the environmental impact analysis concurrent with doing the feasibility study, the hydrologic modeling, the benefit cost analysis, and all of those components to try to develop a solution that would work. In the EIS, we analyzed these 21 resource areas. They cover the full spectrum of the natural, cultural, and human environment. So it was truly comprehensive. And not only did we cover those areas for the approximately 5,500 acre project area, but the area of influence of each of all those alternatives that may be included. So traffic does not stop at the boundaries of the project area. Air quality doesn't. It goes beyond. So first in the EIS, we identified what the affected environment was. Once we did that, we overlaid each of those build alternatives. 1, the wall, 2, stormwater improvements, and 3, a modified version of stormwater improvements onto that environment to see what the changes would be over time. In doing so, the first step we had to take is to identify, okay, what would we consider a significant effect? What would be something that would cross that threshold? So within each resource area in our impact analysis, and the boxes on the slides cross-reference back to sections of that very concise document where you can find more information. We took the NEPA definition of significance, defined in terms of context, how large of an area is affected, and intensity. How much will that effect be felt within that specific context. And we set forth clear and definitive screening criteria to determine what impact would be considered significant and what would not. After doing that, we came up with 4 basic buckets of effect. First is the action would not have an impact on that component. Second, the impact could be less than significant and adverse. It didn't exceed that threshold that we set forth early in the analysis. Third is it did, and there's a potentially significant adverse effect that we really need to take a hard look at and propose measures, mitigation measures or best management practices to reduce to either negligible or less than significant. And the last were positive impacts. What good changes could occur from implementing either alternatives 1, 2, or 3, or the no action alternative, which means not doing anything. Where we identified a significant adverse effect, and in some cases where we identified less than significant adverse effects, we proposed mitigation measures, remedies that could be affected at one of these 3 stages of the project's life to reduce that effect on the environment or the human community. And so these are the consistent buckets of mitigation measures you'll see throughout the document under each resource area. Table 6.4-2 in the EIS provides a complete summary of all the mitigation measures and best management practices that were proposed. So let's take a look what less than significant adverse effects all of the build alternatives share in common. And they're listed here. These are short-term construction effects. They would occur during the construction phase. And they're for a large-scale project that involves a large area and many moving parts, as Lulu laid out, you can expect that this would occur. They were less than significant, but they would occur. And we proposed some control measures to even reduce those further. But things like noise from construction, dust from construction, traffic from construction operations, things of that nature. And then consistent across all build alternatives were long-term, less than significant adverse effects from operations and maintenance, running the system over time. Noise from pump station testing, sediment transport, utility use, electric for the pump stations, maintenance and temporary road closures to keep the infrastructure operational, and overall BMPs, best management practices, would be used to further reduce those effects. So those were generally the buckets of less than significant adverse effects that we identified. Now let's look at the potentially significant adverse effects, which is one of the reasons we did an environmental impact statement under the National Environmental Policy Act. We found through that lengthy analysis, and the smaller document is the draft EIS itself, and the larger document on the table is the set of appendices that support the analyses. These 7 areas have the potential, under one or more of the considered build alternatives, to have a potentially significant effect. And we're going to walk through each of these relatively quickly. And in a comparative way, because the importance of NEPA is to provide the government, NJDEP, with a clear basis for choice between the alternatives, taking into environmental considerations. So the slides parallel the analysis in the EIS. For land use, we found that alternative 1 was the only alternative that had potential for a significant adverse effect to land use, and specifically from the Berries Creek storm surge barrier. And the mitigation measure we proposed was during design or pre-construction, the property owners would be coordinated with to obtain a mutually agreeable settlement. But that was the only alternative that we found that would have a significant adverse land use effect. For cultural and historic resources, included potential effects to the historic Route 46 bridge from specifically the proposed fluvial park, and then possible disturbance to areas potentially containing significant archaeological or subsurface resources. You can see the differences between the alternatives with regard to high sensitivity areas Alternative 1 had the potential to affect 5 such areas, Alternative 2, 3 such areas, Alternative 3, 2 such areas. And we proposed mitigation measures to reduce those effects. Noise and vibration. Each of the 3 build alternatives had a potential for a significant adverse effect to specific structures and facilities during construction. And we proposed mitigation measures to reduce those effects. Biological resources. Alternative 1, again, is the wall, generally adjacent to the Hackensack River plus the Berries Creek storm surge barrier. So one would envision that could have potentially more biological resource effects. And in fact, it was found to be. Alternative 2 and 3, which were the stormwater improvement, more the internal drainage, stormwater drainage alternatives, didn't. So we proposed mitigation measures for those. Water resources, a huge concern here, had a variety of different potentially significant adverse effects. And those are listed here. Water is a big concern here. The whole purpose and need for the proposed action is to control water. That's discussed in section 4.16. Wetlands are also a big issue. Now, keep in mind when the project was initially conceptualized during the Rebuild by Design competition, one of the first letters I read from agencies about this action, written about 3 years ago now, that agencies were concerned, the public was concerned that hundreds of acres of Meadowlands wetlands would be affected by the action, back when we had the Meadow Park and the Meadow Band and things of that nature. Through your good help and citing analyses and sensitive engineering design, we were able to substantially and significantly reduce the amount of impact. We still considered it potentially significant and adverse, but these are the acreage totals that we identified and calculated. A little bit more for Alternative 1 and less for Alternative 2, but instead of hundreds of acres or even dozens of acres, we're talking acre or few acres, which is pretty impressive. So congratulations to you and the team for making that happen. We proposed a variety of mitigation measures for water resources, again being a very sensitive area, both during pre-construction, during construction, and post-construction, I believe. I'm not sure that's on there. Hydrology and flooding. One issue that came up during the modeling of the various alternatives is that Alternative 1, the wall, has a potential for inducing flooding outside of our project area. Alternatives 2 and 3 did not. And we proposed a mitigation measure that would avoid that effect. Hazards and hazardous materials, another large area of concern in the project area and vicinity. Did a lot of work on this area as well. We did identify potential for significant adverse effects to hazards and hazardous materials. You could read through that list here. Generally, fewer sites under Alternative 1 and about the same number of sites under Alternatives 2 and 3. Again, we proposed very detailed mitigation measures during all 3 phases of the project to address those, to reduce them to less than significant adverse or no impact. This is a summary of what I just said at a very, very high level, and I do apologize for going through this quickly, but if I went through it at length, I think I'd probably be the only one awake in the room by the time I was done, so we'll, if you have questions, please ask them, or comments, please ask them after, during the public comment period. This shows that Alternative 1 has the potential for significant adverse effects to 7 resource areas, and Alternatives 2 and 3, as Lulu said, they're similar, and not surprisingly, they have potential for significant adverse effects to 4 resource areas. So one thing that is critical, and this was great to see in this analysis and with these alternatives, were the extent of potential beneficial effects from the action. Again, from all the hard work that went in over the past couple of years in developing these improved alternatives. We found 19 resource areas that have potential for beneficial effects from each of the 3 build alternatives. Now, if you're adding, okay, Booth said there were 21 resource areas, and he said, well, the alternative 1 has 7 potential significant adverse effects, and there's about another dozen less than significant adverse effects. That adds up way over 21. You have to understand, we looked at all components of each resource area, so there's a whole litany and spectrum of potential effects, so they're not additive. So let's quickly go through the beneficial effects. Alternative 1, as Chris noted, would reduce coastal or provide coastal flood protection to about 12 to 21% of the project area, depending upon the future sea level rise scenario you consider. It would build parks, 4 new parks, 10.1 acres in total, and it would create about 990 construction job years and 20 annual operations and maintenance jobs. By comparison, alternative 2 is a little bit different because it's the stormwater alternative versus the wall. So here we identified increased inland flood protection in the East Riser Ditch and LOSEN SLOTE drainage basins. Those buildings and those amount of damages would be avoided. And as Lulu pointed out, there'd be a spectrum of green infrastructure features and improvements that would be installed. So alternative 2 would create 5 new parks, which is less than alternative 1, but in terms of number, but more in acreage. And it would improve 5 existing open space areas, and the components are listed below. It would create a few more, but about the same number of construction jobs and annual O&M jobs as alternative 1. Alternative 3, generally very similar, as Lulu said, to alternative 2. Slightly less reduction along LOSEN SLOTE and slightly less stormwater management improvements than alternative 2, but generally very, very similar. It would create 3 new parks, so a slight reduction, 7.6 acres in total, improve 5 open space areas, and result in a fewer construction job years and operations jobs. But overall beneficial in each case. So this sort of summarizes what I've said in my piece here tonight so far. Alternative 1 would result in the 7 resource area potentially significant adverse effects. Alternative 2 and 3 are similar, but they do have differences. And then some resource areas would experience a gamut from beneficial to significant adverse, depending upon the component of the resource you look at. And the draft EIS is very comprehensive in its analysis if you want information on any one or more of those topics. So the last piece I have is cumulative effects. So if you thought that doing the straight analysis of the direct and indirect effects of 3 radically different alternatives on 5,500 acres in an area that is changing seemingly daily here, since we started this project over 2 years, we've had a fire, a plane crash, I don't even remember what else happened in the project area. It's been a very busy place. Cumulative impact analysis is generally confusing, and I'll try to simplify it for non-practitioners, but NEPA requires that you look at overlaying your considered action in time and space with all the other things that are going on in time and space with your action. So just think about all the things that are going around in this project area on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. And we had to figure that out through the out years and the operation of the project. We collected data from the sources listed under the second header, available news sources, talking to local government officials, data from DEP, input from y'all that are part of the CAG, Citizens Advisory Group. All that was assembled, and we identified 120 projects, 120 projects that were overlaid on in time and space in the future with our proposed action here under each of the three alternatives. That's a lot of analysis, and try to figure out in a crystal ball how these projects are going to interact together. We did a very good job with our affected environment discussion in the EIS, which was chapter 3 of the EIS for those of you that are reading it, where we considered everything that's happened so far, not quite since the earth cooled, but in modern times, what shaped the project area, the 5,500 acres that we considered. So therefore, we were able to focus on those projects that are reasonably foreseeable. What does the community, the decision makers, the politicians think are going to happen within the project area and its vicinity that could affect you as citizens of the project area or the project area's environment? And so we did that. We overlaid that, and there's about a 60-page, I think we got it down to 60-page analysis in the draft EIS of what that could look like, how the projects could work together, this project with other projects proposed, or how they could conflict. For example, if a portion of this project was proposed in an area where it would clog traffic during construction, and someone else was proposing to do a major redevelopment project in the same area at the same time. So think about cumulative effects like that, 3 projects going on at once. You're building a McDonald's, a Walmart, and a new highway next to each other. Not happening here, but that's an example. We looked at all that. We did long analysis, and I'm almost done, and I know Chris is going to say I've bored you all to death, and I apologize. I still have passion for this. We found potential for significant adverse cumulative effects in 4 resource areas, and they would all occur during the construction of either alternatives 1, 2, or 3. There would be no long-term cumulative effects. So once any of the alternatives would be built, it wouldn't work adversely with other actions. It would conflict with other actions out in the future after construction. Those areas were transportation, construction traffic from our proposed project with other projects in the area. Noise and vibration at the same time. Effects to biological impacts, or biological resources, and effects to water resources. And notable about among that were 2 things. One is the proposed projects at the Teterboro Airport, which many of you are aware of. And the other was, keep in mind, as Lulu identified, under Alternative 3, we had the build plan, which was similar to Alternative 2, but we also had laid the groundwork for a future plan. When more money comes available, what else could be done to work synergistically with the build plan under Alternative 3? And we analyzed what that future could look like in the cumulative impact analysis. So should that money become available in the future, a lot of the groundwork for that analysis has been done and would speed that process along. We did propose mitigation measures for each of those potentially significant cumulative effects, and those are set forth in the EIS. So I'm done. Overall, it was a very good news story, and for those of you that have been participatory within this process, with us, with me, with the team, thank you. It's good. Chris?
Thanks, Brian. So on to the exciting stuff. What's coming up next? Not to say that Brian's NEPA presentation wasn't exciting, and I didn't mean to insult Brian, but so where are we today? We're at the DEIS public hearing. We're July, or almost July, 2018. We have the public comment period, which we're in, like we talked about before, but we're moving quickly towards a record of decision and ultimately into the design and permitting and construction as we get into the end of 2019. So the next year and a half is going to be a busy time. Not that it has been busy for the last 2 years, but we're going to be moving towards construction. And we got about a 30-month construction window we're looking forward to complete this by September 2022. So again, the public comment period ends July 15th. We're hoping to publish the final EIS in October, prepare the ROD, publish the notice of availability and request release of funds in November. And we're going to continue our coordination with the different agencies. We work hand in hand with US EPA, the Berries Creek Study Area Group, as well as the Historic Preservation Office. So we're going to continue to coordinate with the regulatory agencies to move this forward and get it through the permitting. We're also developing an operation or an O&M, an operation and maintenance plan. Some of you have heard us talk about that. We're going to be identifying the entities that are going to be performing the maintenance, and the state's obligated to identify that agency and ensure that that operation and maintenance plan is implemented. So again, ways to comment. We're going to have an opportunity to get up and make comments at the mic. Just one thing on that, it's a public comment, so there is no question and answer, so you won't get any response to your comments tonight, but they will be addressed in the final EIS. And again, you can fill out the comment card in front of you. You can email comments to the state website, or you can mail comments to the DEP, care of Dennis. And again, not to keep reiterating, but the deadline is July 15th. So now's the time for the public comment. We're going to open up the mic there to my left, your right. The public comment period will go till 8 o'clock, so we've got an hour. I think we've got 3 people on the list to comment so far. The time limit is going to be 3 minutes per comment, where Dennis is going to moderate. We're going to have a timer up. We ask you to state your name and affiliation, be clear and concise, and hopefully be constructive. And with that, I will let Dennis come up, and we'll put a timer up on the screen so you guys know how much time you got. And I guess the other thing I could say is, if your 3 minutes are up for the first comment, you are welcome to come back for a second, correct? Okay.
Did, some people may not have understood. When the microphone opens, there was a sign-up sheet. I have 3 people signed up. If somebody wants to speak at the microphone, you still can. We can add your name to the list. Some projects we have 60 speakers. Sometimes we have none, because there's multiple ways to comment. If you're uncomfortable with the microphone, use a card. If just speaking to anybody here isn't going to help. You need to put it on the record. So send an email. Use one of the 4 methods that's in your handout. Okay. And also, I'd just like to, before I call up our first speaker, I'd like to just re-emphasize that the slideshow you saw tonight that Brian went through, a lot of information on those slides, right? Tomorrow they'll be up on our project website. The website address is on your handout if you've never gone to that website. Also, the entire DEIS document is on there if you have never looked through it. The executive summary is quite excellent. And if you have comment cards and want to drop them off tonight, put them in that white box, okay? If not, drop them in the mail. They'll come to me. So, as always, Bernie, would you like to be first? Step up to the microphone.
It's fine. Bernie Sobolewski. I'm a part of the Little Ferry Care Group. The only comment I'm going to make is relative to this whole planning that's taken place here. I had requested members of the school board and some others to attend this meeting for one reason. Little Ferry right now is proposing to build a $30 million school, specifically to replace a school that's had problems with water, all related to the LOSEN Slow Creek problem. And I asked them before they continue with the planning to at least attend this meeting for the purpose of getting some input to see what is going to be done that might negate the need for building a new $30 million school and repairing the one that exists currently. The LOSEN Slow Creek, for those who are not familiar, drains the entire town. It actually starts from South Hackensack, it crosses Route 46, it comes through the entire town. And sadly, many portions of it are so sedimented in, so pathetically overloaded with bad piping, so forth and so on. When the water comes down the creek system, if the pipe systems can't handle the water, it winds up on our streets. It makes a mess, creates a poor impression for the community, and I'm tired of seeing Little Ferry in the papers with flooding problems. I would have liked to have had these folk see what's proposed for the LOSEN Slow Creek. I noticed there was some mention about the public school systems, some improvements that may benefit from it. I'm hoping that the dredging process will begin as soon as possible, because without the LOSEN SLOTE Creek draining properly, we suffer. And quite frankly, I think everybody, unfortunately, 80% of the town of Little Ferry is now in a flood zone, and that's troublesome for real estate values, et cetera. I'm anxious to see this project brought to fruition. I hope I live to see it done, and I'm optimistic, let's put it that way. So I give you all credit, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here.
Thanks. It worked great.
My name is Don Torino. I'm president of Moonachie and president of Bergen County Audubon Society, which is the local chapter of the National Audubon Society. So I've been a resident of Moonachie for over 50 years, and a Meadowlands kid who grew up there and still live there. And anybody who's done that has seen the worst environmental tragedies done to the environment that could possibly ever be done. And one of the reasons we're sitting in this room is exactly because of that. Indiscriminate building and so on and so on. So I really do look at this plan as a step forward after 50 years of putting up with flooding and living in flooding as part of your life in Moonachie, but also a part, in a small way at least, to start to bring back some of the environment at the same time. So it's a plan that at least works with the environment instead of working against it. And I'd just like to say that Bergen County Audubon will be there for whatever is needed as far as training, as far as helping with the habitat enhancement. And I really look forward to this getting off the ground.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, I'm Leslie Gottlieb, Little Ferry citizen, as well as a member of the Little Ferry Board of Ed. I seem to be the only one here tonight. We came to see what was going on with this project. I noticed there was a line item that said Little Ferry Public Schools, and as Bernie mentioned, as you may or may not know, we have a situation. We've closed one of our elementary schools, Washington School, which has a creek running behind it. I guess it's part of LOSEN SLOTE. I don't know the name. And we are having to put portable classrooms behind our other school. And we've gone through all the permits and everything else with the drainage and everything that will need to be done for a flood zone. So our primary concern right now is getting that finished for school. But we have to plan with you guys, and you guys with us, to mitigate anything going on if we rebuild or repair Washington School. So that needs to be somehow, this recent addition, recent project has to be reflected in your plan, and we have to work with you guys on the Washington School property to do what's the right thing, because we have that flood behind us, and we don't want to build a school or fix a school and have it flood out. Thank you.
Okay, how does this work? This is a public hearing. You've all met me, right? I love to talk. I love to answer questions. Can't wait to meet in the corner. That won't be happening tonight. Tonight is really about comments that must be on the public record. Brian would probably tackle me if I tried to do it. So this hearing stays open till the recorded time of 8 o'clock for anybody to post a comment. We'll just be putting the mic on standby. We'll shut it down. Anybody that comes in a little late and wants to make a comment for the record, they're entitled to do that. If you're having trouble finding the website or anything on your form, clearly we can help you with that. There's comment cards in the corner. The box is over there if you'd like to write anything or if you need help writing it. But if not, we're just going to stand down until somebody needs the microphone.
My name's Regina Helou, and I live in Little Ferry. I know there's a problem with LOSEN Park, and from what I understood, the EPA and the DEP would give them a hard time anytime they wanted to clean out the drainage. However, where I live in Little Ferry, I've been flooded 3 times. 9 foot the first, 4.5 the second, and 5.5 the third. 2 of them within 13 months of each other. And from what I see of what you're going to do with Plan 3, you're not going to address any coastal or river flooding. And that's where my problem comes from all the time. So I think they should consider what they're going to do with the rivers. Because the Hackensack River comes through my house every single time. The first time I was out of the house for 10 days, we couldn't even get near my house with 9 foot of water.
I want to thank you for your comment, and it's on the record.
I'm Alex Twasson, a Little Ferry resident. I'm on the committee of the Little Ferry South Hackensack Soccer. My concern is this particular project concerns 4 towns, both Carlstadt, Moonachie, Little Ferry, and you mentioned South Hackensack. We only received a notification of this particular meeting 2 days ago. My concern is from the lack of participation from our local governments here and representation, that we're not being notified days in advance where we can go ahead and analyze what's actually going on and make an educated decision or some sort of comment as to what is gonna be proceeding in our towns. And my comment really is, if possible, if we can get an earlier notification so that this way we can prepare. I mean, I had to come from New York to be here, and I went home, but regardless, I just wanted to make sure that we get enough time in advance so that this way we can see our local government, ask them if they're going to actually participate and come here and maybe represent us a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
I am Deanne Ip from the floodplain of Teaneck, New Jersey. And I'm a little bit concerned that all the modeling shows impact of alternative 1, the wall, for Moonachie and South Hackensack, but it doesn't, it stops there, and it doesn't model how the storm surge, how it would affect my street, Pomander Walk in Teaneck, which I consider to have been the final zone of impact for the tidal surge from Hurricane Sandy, which was an indescribable biblical event that was like wrestling with the devil. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Trying from the DP, if there are no other comments, we're going to be closing the hearing and wrapping everything up. Thank you very much for coming.